As we mention transnational crime and borders and states, we can go into, or it helps us transition into our next category of crime, which we used to call political crime. I increasingly find myself not using the term political crime and rather wanting to say political or ideological or power crimes, although it's more of a mouthful, because in an age of religiously motivated terrorism that we see all around us, we realize that it's not just politics in the way we've traditionally thought of politics that we might understand political crime, those people that want to, say, overthrow a government or take over a government. Rather, it's about challenging or disrupting or creating power or ideological systems. So when we talk about power crimes or ideological crimes or political crimes, what we really have at stake is the idea that somebody is committing crime out of a motive that is based on their belief or their ideology. And in particular, it is a motive or belief that is concerned with challenging or changing power in some meaningful way. A classic example of this, as I'm sure you've guessed, is terrorism. What distinguishes a serial killer from a terrorist, for example? A terrorist is not concerned with killing for its own sake. A terrorist is concerned with killing to do something concerning power and ideology, to disrupt power, or to suggest a particular ideology or belief is better or worse. It's to make a point, in other words. Now, one of the other things that's really important to realize about political or power or ideological crimes, and religious crime would be an example of this, is perception is really important. From the perspective of the vast majority of people in the United States, 9/11 is a classic example of terrorism. There's no debate. We take it for granted. It's obvious. It was a crime, and it was a crime of terrorism. However, for many people around the world, when the United States goes into their countries with a military or with drone strikes, the United States is being the terrorist. Now, this is not an argument for relativism. This is not a point to say, well, there's no such thing as crime because they commit crime, we commit crime, and we just call that crime terrorism or political crime. No, it's a much more subtle point. The point is that we can have stable understandings of crime while recognizing that different people will see those same stable understandings in different ways. So while we might see the killing of Osama bin Laden as a legitimate act of war, for supporters of Osama bin Laden or people who are sympathetic to what he stood for and his aims and his goals, the United States was engaged in murder, pure and simple, not in a political or war act. It's also important to remember when we talk about political crimes that these can be done by the state or against the state. And hopefully that becomes clear from the example of killing bin Laden or a US drone strike. Depending on one's perspective, the US or other countries can be victims or perpetrators of political or power or ideological crimes. And those states might be democracies or non-democracies as perpetrators or victims of those crimes. In practice, one of the hardest areas to bring sociology and law together in terms of finding shared agreement comes down to the difficulty of defining what is a political crime. And there are a range of legal definitions, whether there are a range of legal definitions of terrorism, or whether you're talking about what the target is. Is it a civilian target? Is the goal mass terror? Or are we talking about the issue of scale or power ideology? Sociologists and lawyers tend to have quite different ways of seeing these political and ideological and power crimes. And of course, when we bring in politicians or ordinary people, it becomes even more confusing. But the fact that it's difficult doesn't mean we can avoid looking at this very important category of political, ideological, or power crimes.